Hello and welcome to another GiantSlayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today I'll be looking at the current Top 5 compositions for patch 12.6. We finally have a new patch, and with that, a new meta. There has been a significant shift towards AP boards as quite a few AD compositions got smacked by the nerf bat. Of course, AD is still playable, but it's undeniable that there's far more options in the meta for AP, at least for now. Also interesting to note that the pace of the game has slowed down, which has opened up the door for a lot of late game flex compositions built around various 5 costs. Legendary boards are nothing new, but Neon Knights hasn't had too many of those metas outside of when Silco was dominating. Lastly, keep in mind that there is a B patch on the horizon, so the meta is likely to change by this time next week. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 5, we have Innovator coming in at number 5. Playing Innovators in the current meta basically means playing flex. Innovators is just the backdrop for whatever composition you end up with, whether that's Jhin Orianna, Twitch Reroll, or full gold board with a bunch of legendary champions. Innovator fits in because of units like Seraphine, Zilean, Jace, and Echo, not so much because the synergy itself is strong. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation when it comes to this board because all it comes down to is what you hit during the game. Twitch Reroll is still playable, but only worth playing when a player has several Twitch and Singed in Stage 2. The idea behind this version is hitting your 3-star units quickly, ideally before Stage 4, and then pumping all of your gold into leveling. From there begins to look like a standard 5 to 7 Innovator board with the unique opening of Twitch 3 and Singed 3. And there's variations utilizing different 4-cost carries like Jhin, Orianna, and Draven. Aurelia can still do well with Innovator's Socialite, but she's far less consistent after the nerfs, so we only recommend utilizing her in high roll situations. Jhin and Orianna are the easiest to play around, with Zilean being the tie-in for Innovators. Draven, specifically VIP Draven, is weaker than in the previous patch, but hey, if you hit Draven too, it's definitely worth playing. The real innovation for Innovators this patch is the late game legendaries. Jace is the headliner here since he is, of course, an Innovator. Alongside him, you can play carries like Jhin while also utilizing Zeri for Sniper, or toss in Silco, as Silco has once again returned to the forefront of the meta. Point is, you have a lot of flexibility with the 5-cost champions in a late game Innovator board, especially if you play around Socialite with Seraphine. At its core, the champions you definitely want to build a board around are Seraphine, Jace, and Echo. Zilean is also an option since he links with both Jhin and Orianna. Play around with those champions to build a composition based around what you hit. At the end of the day, if you just want to play a standard 7 Innovator board, you still can. Let's move on to the composition coming in at number 4, Renata Bruiser. Renata is back in the meta. Large reason for this return to the meta is Silco, but also because AP boards are more popular. Bruisers with lots of health tend to fare better throughout the game when dealing with AP damage than they do against heavy AD. That's not really what makes Renata a viable option once again, it's because of 5-cost champions. That's right, Renata, like Innovator, is just a gateway for 5-cost champions to shine. The 2 most common are Silco and Tahm Kench, but honestly, Victor, Zeri, Kai'Sa, and Jinx are all playable with the Renata board. Victor is likely the most common due to sharing Chemtech with Renata, but really any 5-cost can do well. So what is a common Renata board? The core champions will be Renata, Zac, and Vi, with the 3rd Chemtech being Victor, though any of them can be a stand-in until you hit Victor. Then you want to add in 2 additional Bruisers, ideally Tahm Kench and Sejuani, but until you find Kench, any other Bruiser is fine, except for Cho'Gath. This is where variations come into play because you can aim for a mid-game focused board with the Tryndamere and Warwick and splitting your damage between those 2 and Renata. Or you can play towards the late game, add in Silco and other 5-cost champions, and instead play a 5-cost carry like Jace or Zeri. Jace works well because you do want both Sejuani and Vi, so this naturally gives you 3 Enforcer. With 3 Enforcer, Silco, Vi, Renata, Zac, and Tahm Kench, your board has a ton of utility. As for itemization, all you really need is Morellonomicon on Renata, with ideally a blue buff. Gunblade is also a decent option to add in more utility, but Renata really only needs those 2 first items to do well. That leaves a lot of room to flex into other items for your board, depending, of course, on what you hit. Safe option is to give defensive items to Vi, but you could go the route of playing Tryndamere as the carry with items in the mid game, or going heavy on AP items with Victor in the late game. Other options include AD items on Jace or AP items on Zeri. All in all, Renata Bruiser is another option for players that favor flex. Use the core 5 or so champions, then play what you hit, and chances are you're going to top 4. With that, we've covered the 2 most flexible compositions of the meta. Let's switch over to more specific builds. Coming in at number 3, we have Arcanists. Okay, it's a bit unfair to say Arcanist is not a flex composition because yes, there are multiple viable carries. But the core of the composition is relatively stable as the goal is to play 6 Arcanist with a few extra traits tossed in depending on your carry. Arcanist is also one of the best boards to have an emblem for because a lot of AP champions flex well into it. There we go using the word flex again, but it's true for Arcanist because there's multiple playable carries. The most common is Ahri, but Malzahar, Victor, Lucian, Corki, Jinx, and a few others can all be used effectively, though the non-Arcanist champions do require an emblem. Regardless of which carry you end up with, Arcanist has 4 core champions. Those champions are Vex, Malzahar, Ahri, and really any Arcanist can fill the last spot, but Swain adds an extra frontline while Ziggs is just a placeholder for Victor. 6 Arcanist is the most common variation, but in terms of what you build a board with, Vex, Malzahar, Ahri, and Swain are the champions you ideally want every game. Vex is your frontline, Malzahar adds utility, Ahri some damage, and Swain serves as a backup frontliner. From those 4, you can build into 6 Arcanist, ideally with an emblem. Twinshot has become a common pairing with Arcanist as Corki, Lucian, and Jinx scale well with AP. Or you can just play an Ahri board with 6 Arcanist and 3 Syndicate. Or if the mutation is Synaptic Web, you can still use Malzahar as the main carry. And of course, Victor is also a top tier option in the late game. Overall, Arcanist is a solid mid-tier composition for any player that favors the AP tree. It's not as consistent compared to our top 2 compositions, but there are enough variations to play it flexibly if you find yourself with a lot of AP items and no real direction for your board. Moving on, let's talk about the composition coming in number 2, Warwick Reroll. Honestly, Warwick Reroll is the best all-around composition in the current meta at lower tiers of play. This is because the board is simple to play and there's enough Warwicks to go around for multiple players. On top of that, it's difficult to know exactly how to punish a Warwick board, meaning the average placement in lower ranks is much higher for Warwick than in Master or Grandmaster, for example. But regardless of what rank Warwick is being played in, chances are it will do well enough to top 4 in most games. That's how consistent this board is, and while we're not quite there yet with the infamous War Week, we're certainly bordering it. What makes this composition so resilient to nerfs and why is it still doing well? Warwick! That's the reason! Warwick is a 4-cost wolf hiding in a 2-cost sheep skin. When you compare his kit to other melee carries, it's pretty clear that Warwick is a bit too good for a 2-cost unit. Both synergies complement his passive, and his passive provides healing and extra damage to high health targets, meaning he can shred through most front lines. The major weakness of Warwick is CC, but guess what? That's the same for any melee carry at every tier. We'd also be remiss not to mention Tryndamere as a partial reason for Warwick doing well, since both of them are Chemtech and Challenger units. Tryndamere is definitely overshadowed by Warwick, but there is no carry dog without his trusty human companion. Another reason Warwick does well is that, being a 2-cost, it's quite easy to 3-star him, and 3-star scaling is quite good on most champions. As for the composition itself, all you really need is Warwick, Tryndamere, and a 3rd Chemtech to build a board with. The most common level 6 variation is Warwick, Tryndamere, Quinn, Camille, Zac, and Zillion. That board provides 3 Chemtech, 4 Challenger, and 2 Clockwork, which are all beneficial to Warwick carry. We definitely recommend spamming this composition in the lower tiers of play because it's often guaranteed to top 4. For any Masters or above, it's a bit tricky to force every game, but still plenty strong to top 4 with. Now's the best time to be playing this composition because the B patch is on the horizon and is likely to include a few nerfs to the doggo. And finally, our number 1 composition for patch 12.6 is Sivir Hextech. Hextech is back with a vengeance after being essentially removed from the entire meta for a few patches. Why this trait has returned so suddenly to the meta mostly comes down to a few key reasons. The largest reason is that they added a lot of scaling to Hextech as the shields and bonus damage now scale by 20% with each augment. That scaling helps a lot in keeping 6 Hextech relevant into late game. The other major reason is this patch had a lot of nerfs, like a lot of nerfs. This left Sivir as one of the few consistent auto-attacking carries to play. Sivir is the backbone for any Hextech composition, and oh boy, does it show in higher tier lobbies because most of the time, there are at minimum 3 players vying for Sivir 2's affection. Sivir is a unique carry right now because she blends both types of damage. Being an auto-attack champion means AD is where a lot of her damage comes from, but being Hextech with bouncing attacks means she dishes out a decent amount of AP damage as well. On top of that, her ability is an attack speed stim, which benefits both types of damage, especially if she has a Rage Blade to scale during a fight. Another champion worth talking about is Alistar. Alistar and Colossus in general haven't had the best time so far in the mid-set, but Alistar is the key to a Hextech board doing well because he can buy a lot of time for Sivir to scale. Bonus shields also play a role here because that keeps Alistar alive and lets him move around the board, stunning large clumps of enemy units. All the positives aside, Hextech is one of the least flexible boards in the current meta and has a major issue of being reliant on Sivir. That issue is highlighted often by multiple players contesting Sivir, so most of the time only one player manages to hit Sivir 2 while the others fall down in the bottom 4. That speaks volumes to how good this board is, but it does make playing it tricky. We recommend this board if you're willing to contest it, but we caution against forcing it and instead suggest playing it when you naturally flex into Sivir. Doing that should result in an easy top 4 and potentially even a win. Alright, that does it for our top 5 compositions for patch 12.6. But before we go, we have one honorable mention to talk about, and that's Debonair. Debonair actually has a lot of viable variations in the current meta. The 4 possible boards are Syndra Reroll, Talon Reroll, VIP Draven, and VIP Zeri. The first 2 reroll boards are difficult to pull off consistently, so we only recommend them when you high roll the units early. Basically, if you aren't close to hitting Syndra 3 or Talon 3 by stage 4, you may want to consider pivoting. VIP Draven is the same standard playstyle as before, but the Debonair variation can lack consistency. We did mention Draven earlier with an Innovator flex board, and that version is likely the better option. That said, Debonair VIP Draven is still capable of top 4ing. Same can be said of Zeri, though it's much harder to scale in the late game and find a Zeri 2 with a Debonair board than it is Innovator. Overall, any of these Debonair builds can do well in the right situation, but don't go out of your way to force them. And that's all for today, folks. Remember that there is a B patch coming sometime soon which may shake up the current meta, particularly for compositions doing too well like Sivir Hextech and Warwick Reroll. Let us know in the comment section below what your favorite composition is to climb with in Ranked. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Future Giant Slayer TFT videos.